Hello, history lovers and seekers of forgotten stories. Welcome back to Old News, where we take a year, shake it like a snow globe, and watch the events settle into focus. Today, we're spinning the dial to 1954. This podcast was artfully produced by Andrew Van Timmeren, and I am your host, Daniel. Let's start in the United States, where a monumental decision came down from the Supreme Court. On May 17, 1954, in the case of Brown versus Board of Education, the court unanimously ruled that racial segregation in public schools was unconstitutional. This landmark decision didn't just alter legal precedent, it redefined American civil rights. The case was named for Oliver Brown, a black father from Topeka, Kansas, who filed suit after his daughter, Linda Brown, was denied entry to an all-white elementary school just 5 blocks from their home. Instead, she was forced to travel much farther across town to attend a segregated black school. Brown was one of 13 parents recruited by the NAACP to challenge segregation in public education. The case was led by future Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall, then the NAACP's chief counsel. Marshall argued that segregation violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. The court agreed. In a unanimous opinion written by Chief Justice Earl Warren, the court declared, "In the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place. Separate educational facilities are inherently unequal." This decision overturned the infamous 1896 Plessy versus Ferguson ruling, which had upheld segregation under the separate but equal doctrine for nearly 60 years. The Brown ruling didn't just apply to Kansas, it applied to every public school in America, striking at the heart of legally sanctioned racism. But while the ruling was a massive legal victory, it was only the beginning. Southern states resisted implementation, sometimes violently. In the years that followed, courts would continue to battle over timelines, local governments would defy federal mandates, and black students, most famously the Little Rock Nine in 1957, would face mobs, soldiers, and threats just for trying to attend school. Still, Brown versus Board of Education remains one of the most pivotal rulings in American history. It sparked the modern civil rights movement, empowered a new generation of activists, and laid the foundation for further progress in the decades ahead. In international affairs, Vietnam began to dominate headlines in 1954. After years of colonial conflict, French forces were decisively defeated by the Viet Minh at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu in May, marking the end of France's control in Indochina. This pivotal moment led directly to the Geneva Conference, held from April to July, where world powers met to address several Cold War flashpoints, including Korea and Southeast Asia. The result was the Geneva Accords, signed in July, which temporarily divided Vietnam at the 17th parallel. The North under the communist leadership of Ho Chi Minh, and the South under a Western-backed government. While the agreement was meant to be a short-term solution, with nationwide elections planned for 1956, those elections never happened, and the division hardened. Though it drew little attention from the American public at the time, 1954 quietly marked the beginning of U.S. involvement in Vietnam, setting the stage for the long and costly conflict that would escalate in the following decade. The Geneva Conference, meant to bring peace, instead became a turning point that deepened Cold War tensions and shaped U.S. foreign policy for years to come. Meanwhile, Cold War anxieties also deepened as Senator Joseph McCarthy's anti-communist crusade reached its peak and began to unravel. For years, McCarthy had used accusations of communist infiltration to stoke public fear and political power. He gained national attention in 1950 by claiming, without solid evidence, that he had a list of communists working within the US government. This launched a period known as McCarthyism, marked by aggressive investigations, accusations, and hearings aimed at rooting out alleged communist influence in American institutions. McCarthy targeted government officials, entertainers, and academics, often damaging reputations without proof. His tactics drew criticism for violating civil liberties, and his influence declined sharply after the 1954 Army McCarthy hearings, where his bullying style was televised and publicly condemned. The hearings were a nationally televised spectacle where millions watched McCarthy aggressively question military officials with little evidence. The turning point came when Army Counsel Joseph Welch famously asked, "Have you no sense of decency, sir, at long last?" The moment pierced McCarthy's mystique, and by December, the Senate voted to formally censure McCarthy, marking the decline of the Red Scare's most visible figure. And in March was the Lucky Dragon radiation incident, which occurred when a Japanese tuna fishing boat, Daigo Fukuryu Maru, meaning Lucky Dragon number 5, was exposed to radioactive fallout from the U.S. Castle Bravo hydrogen bomb test at Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Islands. The explosion was far more powerful than expected, and the crew, located about 85 miles from Ground Zero, was showered with radioactive ash. Within weeks, the sailors began showing symptoms of acute radiation sickness. One crew member died later that year, and many suffered long-term health effects. The incident sparked widespread fear and outrage in Japan, heightened anti-nuclear sentiment worldwide, and contributed to the global movement against nuclear weapons testing. It also raised public awareness of the dangers of radioactive fallout beyond military targets. Meanwhile, the first nuclear power plants were starting up, marking the beginning of civilian nuclear energy. The Soviet Union led the way with Obninsk, which began operation in 1954 and became the first nuclear plant in the world to supply electricity to a power grid. Though small in scale at 5 megawatts, it symbolized Soviet innovation and served both power generation and research purposes, including isotope production. 2 years later, the United Kingdom launched Calder Hall in '56, the first full-scale nuclear power station to generate electricity on an industrial level. It produced 50 megawatts and also supplied plutonium for military use, highlighting the dual-purpose nature of early nuclear facilities. And in 1957, the United States entered the scene with Shippingport, the first commercial nuclear power plant in the U.S. Utilizing a pressurized water reactor design adapted from naval technology, Shippingport generated 60 megawatts and marked the transition toward large-scale civilian nuclear energy. Together, these three plants represented key milestones in the global development of peaceful nuclear power. But in theaters, audiences were dazzled and a little terrified by the debut of Godzilla, released in Japan as Gojira. A direct response to nuclear anxiety following World War II and the Lucky Dragon radiation incident, the film used a monstrous metaphor to reflect Japan's trauma and fear of atomic destruction. It became a cultural icon and kicked off the longest-running film franchise in history. Also premiering was Rear Window, Alfred Hitchcock's stylish and suspenseful thriller starring James Stewart and Grace Kelly, which became one of the most acclaimed films of the decade. The year of '54 also brought a moment of reflection and change to America's calendar. For decades, November 11th had been known as Armistice Day, a solemn reminder of the end of World War I in 1918. But after the seismic toll of World War II and the Korean War, it was clear that the nation's gratitude extended far beyond just one generation of soldiers. So, in June, President Dwight D. Eisenhower signed legislation officially renaming the holiday Veterans Day, and on November 11th, 1954, Americans celebrated it for the first time under the new name, honoring not just the doughboys of the Great War, but all who had worn the uniform in defense of the country. Eisenhower called on citizens to remember the sacrifices of all veterans and to rededicate themselves to peace. Then, one of the most significant consumer electronics breakthroughs was the release of the Regency TR-1, the first commercially available transistor radio. Although the transistor had been invented in 1947 by Bell Labs, 1954 marked the first time it was put to practical use in a mass-market product. The TR-1 made radios smaller, portable, and battery-powered, setting the stage for the miniaturization of electronics, a crucial step toward the development of laptops, mobile phones, and Wi-Fi-enabled devices that define life today. Also this year, color television made its American debut. The CBS network aired the first color TV broadcast, introducing viewers to a new era of home entertainment. However, due to high costs and limited programming, color TV wouldn't become mainstream until the 1960s, and an iconic fast food chain was born. In San Bernardino, California, Richard and Maurice McDonald first opened McDonald's barbecue drive-in restaurant. They later streamlined their operation in 1948 to focus on burgers, fries, and shakes, creating the speedy service system that inspired the modern fast food model. But the turning point came in 1954, when a milkshake machine salesman named Ray Kroc visited their location and was so impressed that he pitched the idea of franchising. This meeting set the Golden Arches on a path toward global dominance. The next year, in '55, Kroc joined McDonald's and opened the first franchise in Des Plaines, Illinois, beginning the transformation of a small burger stand into an empire. Then, Elvis Presley, at just 19 years old, recorded his first single at Sun Studio in Memphis, a rockabilly cover of That's All Right. It wasn't a national hit, but it generated buzz in the South and laid the groundwork for the rock revolution on the horizon. In sports, baseball fans watched as Willie Mays made one of the most legendary plays in Major League history, the catch during Game 1 of the World Series. With his back to the plate, Mays sprinted into deep center field and caught a towering drive over his shoulder, preserving the Giants' lead over the Cleveland Indians. The Giants would go on to sweep the series, and Coco Chanel made a dramatic return to fashion. She had closed her fashion house in 1939 at the outbreak of World War II. Then 15 years later, in 1954, she reopened her Paris couture house at the age of 71. She challenged the dominant new look by Christian Dior, which emphasized cinched waists and full skirts, instead reviving her vision of practical elegance and understated style. Central to her comeback was the introduction of the iconic Chanel suit, a collarless, boxy tweed jacket paired with a matching skirt. Designed for both comfort and sophistication, it allowed women to move freely while maintaining a polished appearance. Though initially criticized in France, her designs, especially the Chanel suit, became widely admired in the US and the UK, helping to re-establish her as a pioneering force in modern fashion. And last, but not least, on August 11th, 1954, Gwen Labinger was born. From humble beginnings, she would grow into an extraordinary woman, one of the most thoughtful, kind, and generous this world has ever known, and the incredible mother of the creator of this podcast. It's a small but meaningful reminder that while history unfolds on the world stage, it's also shaped by the quiet, powerful stories of individuals, just beginning their own journeys, but set on path to change humanity in beautiful ways. Well, that's a wrap on 1954, a year of shifting tides, cultural sparks, and moments that would echo across the decades. In the words of Winston Churchill, those that fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Thanks for listening to Old News, a year in review. Stay curious, and we'll see you next time.